Hello, everybody. Welcome again to our weekly show about politics. I am Markos Moulitsas here with Kerry Eleveld. This is Daily Kos's The Brief. Today, we're going to be talking about the future. It's so nice not to have to talk about whether Joe Biden, whether the Democrats are going to win. I guess we still have Georgia, and we're going to talk about Georgia later on. But we're also going to start taking a look at what's going to happen when Joe Biden takes power. So we're going to have David Dayen from the Prospect. He's going to be talking about his Day One Agenda project. It's a series of stories talking about what Joe Biden can do via executive action, even if he has a hostile Senate. And Kerry, I know you are talking about keeping Donald Trump accountable. Because obviously Democrats are going to say, oh, we need to look ahead. We can't look back. But you feel very passionately, and I agree with you, that we really should make sure that any crimes are punished, correct?
Yes, that's true. I just want to remind people, I started off with a mask up, just a public service announcement, given the surge we're going through, how scary it is. We've all lost people or know people who have, been lost. So please wear your mask. It's a simple thing you can do. And frankly, in my case, I feel like it's really doing a public service to everybody. So, they don't have to see me. Just a mask crusader. So we're already, it seems so hard to move past this moment where, oh boy. Hey, my wife is in the closet, literally. Laura, you want to?
We got the joys of working from home in a modern COVID world with children.
Sure. Okay, we're just gonna make a mad dash now. People, this is how it goes. This is how it goes. Okay, go on. Okay. All right. So, yeah.
So the question again, just to reset the question is, how do we hold Donald Trump accountable when Democrats and Joe Biden with his unity shtick, right, are going to really want to talk about moving forward and not looking back and not angering Trump supporters, blah, 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 right?
Right. So the point is we're at this place where already we're starting with the tension of the incoming administration and whether or not Biden is going to do certain things that, the progressive community would want him to do. I just personally, I wrote about this morning. It just feels like, how accountable do you hold the Trump administration, right? How accountable do you hold Donald Trump for the crimes that he committed in office, the unethical behavior, all that stuff, and then the people who carried out things at his direction? And, I just really feel like he just undermined our democracy and, he pummeled it. It was an all-out assault on everything about our democracy. I think that there needs to be, and I don't necessarily think this is just a moment of healing, but it's an imperative that we hold someone who so boldly tried to take down our democracy, that we hold him and his chiefs accountable for what they did. And, there's several different things. We're already hearing from the Biden administration that, of course, he doesn't want his whole, administration, his whole tenure to be sort of overshadowed.
And it shouldn't. Yeah, it won't be.
Looking backwards.
Chew and walk at the same time.
Right. And there's a few different places where this makes a difference, right? He can set the tone for House Democrats. He can also, in terms of how many investigations they do, that type of thing. He also, of course, is going to be picking the leadership of the Justice Department, and the Justice Department, will have a say in what kind of avenues they go down. And there are a couple things in New York that are already happening that he has really no say over, which is right what the New York Attorney General and what the Manhattan DA are doing in terms of looking at Trump's business and his personal taxes and his foundation and all that stuff, right? That's going to happen no matter what. But I don't think that you can just, gloss over what is going to be happening at the Justice Department and within the House Democratic majority. I mean, number one, the Justice Department, he should just appoint good people, and then he should get the heck out of their way and just let the criminal and civil divisions do what they need to do to hold Trump to account, right? I mean, you can't allow this guy to do what he did and not send a message that it isn't going to be dealt with afterwards. And there's also the crimes against humanity. There's the situation of stripping kids from their parents and caging them. And, these are things that are unconscionable, that our U.S. government never should have been in the business of doing in the first place. And we can't allow that to go, to just be glossed over because people want to move forward. Also, on the House Democrats side, if they want to limit and have a very sort of focused approach on a few different areas that they want to investigate, that's fine. I mean, obviously, the House Democrats need to do more than just be looking backwards. They need to be pushing forward some progressive policies, passing bills, whatever. And that's very important. I don't mean whatever, like it's not important. It's extremely important. But it's extremely important, too, that we send a very definitive message to the next autocrat who could come into power, who will likely, when they get there, be far more competent than Donald Trump, and let them know that there's going to be consequences for.
Yeah, Kerry, that's a good point. I'm not particularly driven by revenge at this point. I think what's happening in New York is digging into his personal stuff. I think that's almost revenge enough, right? His whole business, his own personal stuff are being impacted. They're being looked into, and that has nothing to do with Biden. It has nothing to do with the federal government, and that actually probably enough for my own desire for revenge. What I'm afraid of, Kerry, is what you just said. The next autocratic president, right? It doesn't necessarily even have to be a Republican one, right? There's a scenario where a populist left-wing president could also abuse the office of the presidency for not just partisan gain, but to undermine democracy itself. We've seen this happen around the world, right? This is not a crazy scenario. And what used to be the crazy scenario that this can't happen here, we just saw that happen here.
Right.
So one, I think things need to be investigated. But two, I'm less worried about punishing people, and there should be that absolutely as a deterrent for that next potential administration. But I would like to see our institutions reinforced, using legislation to make it harder for the president to mess with the Justice Department, to meddle with the Justice Department, to use the Attorney General as his own private attorney, to not be able to ignore congressional subpoenas and edicts without any real consequences. And what we saw the last 4 years is Trump could literally do anything, his people could do anything, and there were no consequences. And that, I think, is incredibly dangerous. Our institutions aren't as resilient as we thought they were, and we lucked out because Trump's an idiot. It's the only reason. When we get a smart, like a Putin-like autocrat, populist, who can win an election based on, in Republican sense, based on racism and demagoguery, can this country survive? Can its democratic institutions survive unless we reinforce them in the next several years?
Right. And I agree with you. And I agree with you about passing new legislation, too. Of course, we don't know whose hands the Senate is going to be in. Right. And so that'll make a difference. I mean, House Democrats may try and pass a bunch of stuff, including reforms, institutional reforms and things like that regarding the government, and trying to put some limitations on what the executive branch can do. But Senate Republicans, if they hold the majority, might not be into that. And, Senate Republicans aren't into much of anything other than passing judges. So, which they won't, they may not be into it during the Biden administration.
Right.
They won't be into it at all. They're not going to be in
weird
the personnel business. They're not going to be in the legislation business. They're going to be nothing, like zip.
Yeah.
But I think that one thing House Democrats can do is they can investigate these, and the improprieties, their things that they've done. They must do some investigation, and the Justice Department must too.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think we talk about whether the Senate can be Do we have David Dayan with us, or is there technical difficulties?
I don't see him. And right,
technical vote. Okay.
It looks like we may end up going to our in-house guest first, Monique.
Okay.
And yeah, so go ahead. But that looks like the direction we're headed.
All right, that sounds fine. And we have Monique with us. She's ready to go. So David Dayan has been writing, and hopefully we'll have him on a little bit later. He's been writing about what Joe Biden can do without control of Congress to right the ship right after 4 years of Trump. But hopefully we'll get to him soon. Do we have Monique ready to go? Yes.
It Monique. Looks like here she is.
So, hi, everybody. Monique Teal is the Senior Campaign Director at Daily Kos. She is in charge of managing our incredible activism efforts, and she's done a lot of work regarding Georgia, right? So, Monique, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Finally.
I like your background.
I feel very like nice. You literally just like pulled up a chair. Like, pull up a chair, Monique. What you got? Anyway, I love it.
Thank you.
So Monique, can you tell us, I guess, what's a little background, like what does the Daily Kos Activism Department do? Because I think people think activists are like, oh, they're asking us for a petition, right, to sign a petition, right? There's so much more that we do, and how much, activism we drive, and volunteers and money that we raise. Can you talk a little bit about the Daily Kos Activism Department?
Sure. So I would just say the activism department is massive. We do a lot of different things for a lot of different folks. I run the advocacy team in particular, and so I'm going to focus a little bit more on that. But generally, the idea with activism is that our job is to build the progressive left. And we do that through a lot of different ways. One of the biggest ways that we do it is through action. So like you said, signing petitions, but also sending letters to elected officials, going to rallies, like basically any way you can participate in democracy, the activism team tries to make it easy for you to do. And we do this in coalition with hundreds of organizations at this point. We very much believe that we are stronger. Not only do we believe it, but I think this election proved it, that we're stronger when we work together and we're building together. And so everything that we do, we're doing in coalition with folks who are on the ground, who understand the conditions, who know their elected officials, who can really give us up-to-date real-time information so that we're not just going in blind, but we're going in with a whole bunch of people who are already invested, just like in Georgia, and supporting their work. I like to call us air support, if you will. So we're here to show up with volunteers. We're here to show up with money. We're here to show up with any kind of resources we have to make it just available to people who are doing the work that are going to change the conditions of the country. So that's like a really broad, but like,
yeah, no, that's great. And I love the idea of air support, because we've been very specific in that we've never sort of tried to keep things in-house, right? We always search to see who's doing the good work. So I know for example, in Arizona, which Joe Biden won by, I think about 11,000 votes, right? 10,000 votes.
Yeah.
Daily Kos Activism did a lot of work helping fund Native American organizations on the ground that were doing the kind of organizing to get them registered to vote and turn out to vote, correct?
Sure. And I just want to fine tune that a little bit. Our job is to follow the energy of the readers. So the Daily Kos readers are the ones who decided that we were going to invest in American Indian organizing and voter registration and basically anything they needed to show up. The same way they decided that we wanted to invest in stopping voter suppression in a number of states over the last. I've been here for 6 years, and every year, readers just decide that we're going to go all in to make sure that democracy works in this country. So activism really is about following the energy of the folks who are already doing the work.
Right. So you follow the energy of the Daily Kos readers, and then you focus in on where the energy is on the ground, right? Can you tell us in Georgia specifically some of the connections that you're working with right now to make things happen there?
Yeah, I am so impressed by the organizations in Georgia. And I should say that we've been working with them for years now, because Georgia is a long-term project. It's not something that happened in one election cycle or even in the last 2 election cycles. It's something that people who live there and who care about their communities have decided to invest in for a very long time. And that means a lot of things in a lot of different ways. But some of our largest partners right now would be the greatest. That would be New Georgia Project and Fair Fight Action. Just like the most, I mean, they're just so generous with their information and their time and their willingness to help us help them. I can't speak highly enough about those organizations. Also about their creativity. And if we have time, I would love to talk more about that. There's also the Asian American Advocacy Fund that are just so good at turnout and so good at talking to their communities in particular and making sure that things are in multiple languages, for example. There is the Galeo Impact Fund, which is, oh gosh, it's the Georgia Alliance of Latino Elected Officials Impact Fund. And we actually have a number of people on staff who are working with them right now because they want some star power in the state. And so we're going to help, we're going to show up with some star power to help them out because they have been critical, just absolutely necessary to reaching out to Spanish speaking communities. They're just, I mean, I would just say Georgia is one of the most organized states I've ever worked in terms of the way everyone is very good at working together. There are no silos. People understand that if they're going to win, they have to work together. And so they do it. And they do it every day. And they've been doing it for a decade plus. They're just really, really good at it down there.
You know, when you win a state by about 10,000 votes, which I think is what Georgia's looking like right now, maybe even a little less, every single one of those groups provided the winning margin, right? You need every single one of them. And this is a stat that blows my mind. Like this entire election, Donald Trump got 369,000 more votes in Georgia in 2020 than he did in 2016. 369,000. He won Georgia by 5 points in 2016, and he added 369,000 votes to that. Democrats, Joe Biden, added 598,000, close to 600,000 new votes, and that's the difference. That's why we were able to sort of eke out this very, very slight win, and hopefully moving into January. But let me, Monique, remind me, and maybe I'm remembering this wrong, but when we went in for Stacey Abrams in 2018, and might have even been 2017. I think we were amongst the first to do so, right? Nobody believed in Georgia.
Yeah, there was just so much energy behind her, and I hope everyone's had the opportunity to
locally. Yeah.
I hope everyone has had the opportunity to see her speak in person, because there is a way about her where no matter what she is saying, she's saying it directly to you. And it's you don't have to. She doesn't have to have your lived experience because she understands and empathizes with whatever it is that you're dealing with. And I think she has been such an important voice and figurehead for Georgia for like all of the other work that's also happening at the same time, because this is very much like a multiracial, multi-generational coalition, and a coalition that has also done deep investment in rural counties, which I think is really what was the game changer. Is that I would just say this year with COVID, they saw what state-sanctioned violence really looks like when the president abandoned them, when their governor abandoned them, when the Senate abandoned them. And really, Georgians had to take care of themselves because all of these elected Republican leaders weren't going to do it. And one of the big things that came out of that is that organizations like New Georgia Project they were reaching out into Southwest Georgia, which is overwhelmingly rural. It's also very, very Black. And they found out that hospitals weren't open down there. So folks didn't have access to testing and whatnot. So an organization that was built out of voter registration became an organization that did also just direct service, making sure that people could get access to the most basic needs because government had failed them so much. So this multiracial, multi-generational coalition really is a coalition of people who are ready to move forward into something better. Like they just recognize that like this isn't working. And so they showed up for themselves and for their communities. I really love Georgia.
No, I can feel it just
emanating. It's kind of just oozing from you. Is that, and which is great. I'm not knocking it because it's making me happy. But you talked about the creativity of some of these groups. Is that part of what you meant by the creativity? Is there more you want to talk about? Because I love all of it.
Yeah. So again, the greatest New Georgia Project. one of the challenges of COVID and also just the challenges of organizing. Like, I love organizing. I think it's super fun. I'll be out there knocking doors and getting people to sign petitions all day long. But like, normal people like to play video games, right? Normal people like to do other things. And so the thing that I really appreciate about Nsé Ufot, who is the executive director, is that she has this thing of like, meet people where they are, right? And young people, they're on Twitch. They're watching other folks play video games. That's what you do on Twitch, if you play video games and watch other people. And so that's what they did. They want to go to concerts. And so they threw concerts, well, virtual concerts this year. And a lot of it was about making democracy fun. Right? It wasn't just about the struggle. It was also about the community and about the things you can do. It was about art. It was about, they did sneaker giveaways, which I am very jealous. I didn't know about those till afterwards because they gave away Jordan 4s. But right, like they met, like they just thinking about like the actual people they wanted to engage and found them where they were. They weren't like, come to us. We're very cool in our hall, right? In our congregation hall or whatever it was. They're like, oh, you're at the club? We'll go to the club, right? And they just made it very accessible to everyone wherever they were.
Why is this sort of remarkably creative? I mean, it seems pretty obvious that everybody should be doing this everywhere, right?
I mean, I think I'm cool, but I'm not actually cool. And I think the thing about a lot of organizers is that we are nerds. Like, right, we think like the things that we are engaged with and think are very fun or whatever. That's not what normal people are like. Normal people don't get stoked about waking up at 7 a.m. to knock doors all day. That's not a thing outside of like our very small universe. And so I think what's also great about Georgia is that a lot of these organizations are actually led by cool people, like real cool people. So,
we think you're cool, Monique. We think you're cool.
Yeah. What does that say about us, though? We think we're all cool, right?
I mean, look at us. Look at us. What's not cool about this? Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so Monique, I saw that, I think as of yesterday, the Daily Kos community had raised over $1 million for the Warnock and the Ossoff races since the end of election day. So just in the 2 weeks period, right? So clearly the Daily Kos community is incredibly engaged. Are you seeing that engagement beyond just raising money? I mean, signing up volunteers and things like that. How's that going? And do you have any sense of how it looks like in the ground in Georgia as you talk to organizers? Because we're going to win, the party that wins those races is the one that's going to suffer the least amount of drop off from 2 Tuesdays ago. So how does that look from both from the Daily Kos side of it and on the ground in Georgia from your perspective?
So I'll just say more than 100,000 Daily Kos readers volunteered during this cycle, and about a quarter of them volunteered in some capacity in Georgia. Like they're just, we work in a lot of states, so it's hard to figure out exactly which state people were in, but we can guess that about a quarter of them were in Georgia at some point. So let's just say Daily Kos readers are invested in Georgia. I'm very excited about. And I'll just say we raised more than $1 million just for the 2 candidates since election day, but we also continue to raise for all of these organizations. We actually expanded the page because we wanted to make sure that we got some of these groups that are particularly in Southwest Georgia and in the rural counties. And so we are still fundraising. And at this point, we're at something around $500,000 for these organizations. In total, throughout the entire election, we have to be around $3 million just for Georgia between candidates and organizations. So like, we love Georgia.
Yes.
And I'll just say from the conversations that I've had with organizers on the ground, everything is going really, really well. A lot of the reason we focus so much on fundraising for these organizations isn't just because it makes us feel good, although it does. It's also because it allows them to do long-term growth. And so they're hiring people who are volunteers during the election, which means that we're creating jobs in their communities. These folks are then really stoked to be doing this work, and it becomes a career path for them. So like, we are deeply invested in the movement building that is happening in that state. And that's why we push things like fundraising for organizations so hard, because when the election is over, the work doesn't stop. And I'll just say right now, at last count, I think they had something, I don't want to get this wrong, but I believe there was something like 600,000 absentee ballot requests have already come in for the special election, which and they're overwhelmingly Black.
Whoa.
Nailing it in Georgia.
Great.
Whoa.
That's great. So this may be sort of
Chills.
yeah, that's fantastic. This may be sort of too granular or sort of on the groundish. I don't know, but I wonder if, you know, I hear you talking about like reaching out to young voters and whatever. And of course, what we're trying to do is achieve getting our presidential, you know, group of voters out for the special or for the runoffs, right? And I just wonder, like, do you get any sense of how much it's resonating for Democratic voters that if Joe Biden is, you know, there's going to be a Biden-Harris presidency, right? But administration, but how hamstrung it will be if there's a McConnell-controlled, a Republican-controlled Senate, right? Do you get a sense that realization is sort of making its way to the Democratic electorate in Georgia?
That's a good question. And yes, these are super savvy voters, right? These are people who've been in this fight for a very long time. These are people who saw an election stolen from them. The gubernatorial was stolen from them. And that there is so much residual anger about that still in that state. I can't say this enough. These are folks who follow politics. They care about politics. They understand that Republicans are the ones who have been blocking relief programs for them. That the Republicans are the ones who have been closing. Like, these are very, very smart people who are tired of being left behind. They're ready to move forward with elected leaders who are going to be responsive to them, who care about them, who are invested in their lives, you know? Yes, these are folks who want to win, and not just for like the sake of winning for the Democratic Party, the sake for being like, look what we did, but specifically because their lives are on the line and they completely connect politics to what's happening on the ground in Georgia.
That's awesome. Monique, and Kerry, we should do like a view, right? Like all three of us. Like,
I like it. And stuff. I don't know. I feel like we could do something like that. Could be good.
I got chills. I'm so excited about Georgia.
Chicken soup for the Democratic soul. That's cool, right? Isn't that cool? Like super cool.
Yeah,
100%. Monique, so I think we're almost out of time. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe what people could do to help with that Georgia effort here in these last 2 months, which is really a sprint at this point.
Yes, thank you. I would love to tell people how to get involved. So if you're not already on the email list, it's very easy to join. There's a button on the website. Basically, if you sign anything, any kind of petition, make any kind of phone call, you're automatically added to the list. Please do so, because every day we send opportunities to either volunteer, which you can make phone calls, you can text bank, you can write letters, lots and lots of ways to volunteer. Also, please continue donating. Y'all have been incredibly generous, and it's making a huge impact, as we've seen. And then as more opportunities come through, we will continue to push them out. We're also we're on top of Lindsey Graham right now, let me tell you.
It's good to hear, because no one deserves to come up and like Lindsey Graham. I mean, anyway, don't get me started on that one.
Well, Monique, thank you so much for joining us. Such a pleasure. I hope you can join us soon to talk more about Georgia and other activism opportunities.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was fun.
Bye-bye. Kerry, you know, one thing that Monique sort of pointed out that really resonates with me, and I don't think we talk about this enough, to be honest, is, and I'm at fault, is I talked about the $1 million that we raised for Ossoff and Warnock, right? And she immediately turned it into the $500,000 that we've also raised for these on-the-ground organizations. And you think about the hundreds of millions of dollars that were thrown into TV ads by campaigns that didn't really move the needle. I mean, if you want to talk, Biden dramatically outspent Donald Trump in TV everywhere except one state. You know what that state was?
Oh, I did know this, but go ahead. Sorry.
Georgia. It did not matter. These ads did not move. And so, not saying that Warnock and Ossoff are going to piss away all that money into ads, but a big chunk of that money will be spent on TV advertising, because that's what you do. So I love the idea of these organizations that are actually doing the hand-holding, getting actual voters getting them motivated and registered and turned out to the polls, and apparently also providing COVID resources because government's not there and other resources. And so I'm just making a note to myself to really sort of try to shift my thinking to be more focused on these organizations, because we've seen this in places like Arizona, where we focus our spending on funding Native American voter outreach organizations.
Right.
It happened in North Dakota. We've done this in a lot of places, and I actually feel better about that money than I do about TV.
You know, as an organization, we can also figure out which of these groups is like most effective, right? It sounds like there's a really good. I mean, I'm familiar with some of the groups she mentioned, and then there were some groups that I hadn't heard of. But you know, it sounds like based on Monique's experience, which is much different. You know, I write for the site, and she's actually communicating with these groups. That Georgia has a particularly good set of of groups, and that makes sense because we just won Georgia, you know, despite what you may hear on the fake news, right? Democrats just won Georgia. So, you know, I think the other thing I think about is having worked in Washington. I mean, I don't live there now and I don't work there now, but I spent, you know, a handful of years there, and I'm trying to think if that's true. That's about right. And it is a place where good ideas go to die. I'm not kidding. It's unbelievable. But something about being in the groupthink in DC makes creativity extremely difficult. And, you know, it makes creativity difficult among the creative thinking among the reporters who cover politics. It makes it difficult among the strategists. It makes it difficult among the lawmakers, right? So the type of creativity that she's talking about on the ground with those groups going out and doing things in order to get like young people, you know, involved, that is just wholly different than what you get if you're giving money to a Democratic super PAC, for instance, or whatever, you know, they're going to focus on advertising. And I probably believe more than you do that some advertising is worthwhile. I think that Joe Biden, particularly because he was fighting for airtime, you know, against Donald Trump, who was like such a constant hot mess that he was just dominating, that it actually did help some. But I think there's an overemphasis on that type of communication, and I think there's an overemphasis on the way Democratic strategists typically think about this stuff in DC. So, you know, you're getting much more creativity for your buck when you're finding a good organization in one of these states and giving to them.
Yeah, creativity and long-term infrastructure building, right? Yep. And, you know, she talked about those southwestern, or was it southeastern rural counties. They are, when people think about the Black community, almost anywhere you think urban, right? I mean, that's sort of, and a lot of traditional Democratic GOTV efforts are really focused on those urban centers. And what Republicans have done so effectively is they've maximized rural turnout. And Georgia is one of those places where there is a significantly large rural Black community that nobody had started organizing, I think, until a few years ago. And so focusing a lot on these organizations that are working to get that vote out, I actually think is critical, because we don't want Georgia to be this sort of 50-50 state moving forward, right? Georgia, by demographics, is a blue state. And so by all rights should be firmly in the Democratic column. And it's particularly important because some of those white Midwestern states are really getting away from us. Like, it's going to be incredibly difficult to win Ohio and Iowa absent a massive wave. Minnesota's long-term trends look really, really scary. So do Wisconsin. The whole Midwest may be lost to us if current trends continue. Obviously, trends can change, right? But if current trends continue, so we need that new base, and that new base can be Arizona, Georgia, and Texas, even. Right. So these are the states, and they all have significantly large rural communities of color. In Texas, it's Latino. In Arizona, too, it's Latino. In Georgia, it's Black. And I think the lessons that we're learning in Georgia will be incredibly valuable to apply to continued organizing in these new sort of emerging Democratic strongholds, which are emerging because of demographics are shifting. So I'm really, really excited.
Do you know what percentage in Georgia the Latinx vote accounted for. I'm wondering like that relative to, for instance, a Florida or an Arizona or something like that. I mean, I just wonder if you have a sense of if
Georgia. I mean, it's relatively small. I think it's about 3 to 5%.
Okay.
Again, the margins are so tight that every single group was the sort of winning margin, but it's incredibly fast growing. Mm-hmm. It is very small as a percentage, and also Georgia is one of the fastest growing states, right? You have this sort of influx from all over the world to Atlanta and its suburbs. And so even as the Latino community grows as a percentage, it doesn't look as dramatic because of this incredible influx in population. But, we're talking about
influx of young people.
Yes.
Which is our cue.
Yes. So we have a change. We have a change of programming. David Dayen cannot join us because of technical difficulties. He'll be joining us at a later date, hopefully next week, to talk about Joe Biden's Day One agenda. So instead, we're going to have Kara Zelaya. She is Daily Kos. Again, what's your changes, right? So it's start with social media.
Social media coordinator, yeah.
Okay, social media coordinator. And Kara has been absolutely obsessed with the youth vote. And actually, I don't know if, Kara, did you see this Georgia numbers on the youth vote in Georgia that came out today?
I didn't see the numbers about the youth vote in Georgia, but I did want to talk about the youth vote in general, that it went
Let's talk about the new.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I think I should be like resident young person. I think that's like my new title at Daily Kos is just resident young. So in 2016, 24 million young people went to vote in 2016. In 2020, that number went up to 53 million. That is more than it was 24 in 2016. 24. It is 53 in 2020. So that is more than double. Yeah.
Wow.
That is crazy good. And in fact, one of the headlines that I kept seeing when I was researching, just like, because we're still studying, how the youth vote went, what propelled them. But one of the big headlines that I kept seeing over and over again was that youth voter turnout is definitely a story, but youth activism is what we need to continue talking about. Because in a time of COVID, when canvassing was a high risk thing, young people really stepped up to work the polls, to knock on doors, to be the front face at a time when like our immune systems were the thing that could propel an election forward. So there's some headlines that are claiming that if it wasn't for the youth vote, Joe Biden wouldn't have won the election. And for me, it's as simple as that.
No, it's for sure. When it's that close in so many different places, that is the margin. In Georgia, for sure. And again, everybody's the margin. But you need them all. And youth vote did turn out.
Yeah, they really turned out.
That bodes well for, that bodes well for our chances in some ways in Georgia, because the story of Georgia switching, and turning blue this particular cycle is a story of, a decade plus of gravitational pull of, young, up and coming, diverse, group of voters moving into Atlanta and its suburbs. So, that bodes well. I mean, let's hope. One thing that I wanted to talk to David Dayen about, and I think that this is a nice overlap, is this effort, this potential effort, because it's been getting a lot more traction in the Senate recently and among Democratic senators, of things that Joe Biden can do right away without having to pass legislation, particularly if the Senate ends up staying in Republican hands. And one of those things is canceling student debt, right?
Yeah.
And we've had recently Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate Minority Leader, could be Senate Majority Leader, hopefully Senate Majority Leader. One never knows. But anyway. So, and he's gotten behind immediately canceling like $50,000 in debt for every person who has it, student loan debt. So, I just wonder, like, where did that figure in on the issues, and how do you think it potentially plays in a place like Georgia?
I mean, I think it plays massively in the cities where I used to live in Atlanta. I actually did my first 2 years of college in Atlanta. I went to a small women's college called Agnes Scott in Decatur, Georgia. And, the Atlanta population is extremely well educated. It's one of the most well educated areas in the country. And that's especially true for young people, for people of color. And I'm a young person and a person of color who is plagued by student debt. And I know that when you ask me what my first issue is as someone who is a part of this country, it is right now, COVID, right? Because there is nothing if we are on lockdown.
Yeah.
But after that, it's student debt relief. And it's not just because I'm seeing it from the perspective of something that has affected me, but it's an economic problem. Because I can't believe that we live in a country where we have the most educated generation of all time. And we're like, you know what would be great? Economically disenfranchising these people, making sure that they're just totally squished down by this massive burden. And it's not a matter of being reckless. It's a matter of the fact that the price of higher education has just gotten out of control. And I know that a lot of people talk about how, well, this was a choice. And I'm like, well, was it? Like, what choice did I have? If I didn't go to college, like, what career was available for me? But even beyond that, I think that's kind of a dumb argument, because we all benefit from an educated populace. I think one of the main problems that we've seen in the last 4 years is massive misinformation. And
quit it, Kara. Where did we see that? Quit it.
And an inability to do basic critical thinking and research, And I went on a huge tweet storm about this, because my best friend is first generation Colombian, and he was the first person in his family to go to college. He ended up getting his PhD in neuroscience at MIT. It is unbelievably burdened by student debt, has been doing Alzheimer's research, is now a high school teacher. And people are like, well, that was his choice. I'm like, y'all are benefiting from this Alzheimer's research he did. What are you talking about? We all benefit from a very educated populace, and it's time to stop disenfranchising the most economically capable people, honestly. This is just like a force that is being held up, potential energy that we're just stifling. And if we just freed it out, the amount of research, information, economic boom that we would get would benefit everyone in the world.
The economic boost would be phenomenal. And I keep thinking about, all the millennials and Gen Zers and whatever who can't afford who can't afford to buy a house, to be a first-time homeowner, because they're saddled with debt, and home prices are through the roof. And just the amount of potential that, like you said, could be unleashed into the economy, which would boost everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Democrats are arguing for it. And this is another point of potential tension with the incoming Biden administration. I mean, it seems like kind of a no-brainer, but I also see some Democrats already sort of angling for it. And I just want to, it's really interesting. I mean, this is a little bit back to the Senate, the grind here in DC, but Schumer's been talking about how even what Democrats got done in 2009, 2010, when they had unified control of government under Barack Obama for 2 years, wasn't bold enough, wasn't, and he said, I'm just going to quote, I'm going to do a couple of quotes here. Schumer said in the New York Times, he told one of the columnists there, my view is if we don't do bold change, we could end up with someone worse than Donald Trump in 4 years. And he said, he acknowledged that what they had done in 2009, 2010 wasn't, quote unquote, big enough or bold enough. So that's really interesting for someone like Chuck Schumer to be talking in that kind of language. And I do feel like, I see quotes from Elizabeth Warren talking about we really need to deliver real, bold solutions. And I think that, it goes beyond just the student debt discussion. But I feel like we're already starting to see congressional Democrats rev up to pressure what, in some cases, like the student debt thing seems like such a no-brainer to me. And I can't actually, if Dave Dayen had been here, he would have explained a little bit more the ins and outs of how that gets done. You do it through the education department's compromise and settlement authority. You use that authority to cancel the debt. But it can be done without legislation. Just, it can be.
I mean,
so yeah, go ahead.
And we've seen that because, as someone who pays a lot monthly for my student debt right now is frozen because of the pandemic. I mean, This current government, literally like that, was able to freeze my accrual of interest for the span of the last 8 months. So for me, it's kind of dumbfounding. And it was one of those things, it's the main thing that plagues my thoughts. And I'm like, wait, so the government can just flip a switch and now my interest is and look, I know that everyone is worried about the economic, like, what does this mean? And the debt, all of a sudden Republicans care about the national debt.
Go away. Yeah.
But we never, the national debt is never a problem when we're deciding to start wars across the world. It's never a problem when we're trying to bail out
farmers.
the banks. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Iowa farmers. To bail out Republican groups only matters when we do. And you know that the Trump campaign actually had mailers where they were bragging about that freezing that student debt. So they know the power of actually rewarding people by giving them stuff.
Right.
And Democrats need to really internalize this. Kerry, I have a question. There's a sort of debate in the Democratic Party about the effects of the Defund the Police movement. And you have a lot of moderate Democrats that won these marginal sort of rural-ish districts in 2018. They got swept in the wave and then they got swept out. And they're blaming the Defund movement for their losses. My thinking is we don't win this presidential election without that movement and the activism that you were talking about, Kara, because it motivated young people to turn out and vote. And yet, they don't exist in those marginal rural districts, but they actually do exist in Atlanta, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philly, the places that we needed to win the actual election. That's my theory. What's your thoughts on that issue, on the issue of defund and how it impacted the race?
Well, I'm going to use another theory that you've talked about on the show before, which is the theory of the hidden deplorables, which is that in 2020, that having Donald Trump on the ticket, for people who haven't watched, basically brings out these very intense voters who are much more conservative, much more pro-Trump. I think that had a bigger effect in those districts than the word defund the police. I haven't seen the data on it. I haven't seen the research on it. I don't even know how you can factor for that in a silo. But I mean, I do think that young people were unbelievably energized by the BLM marches of the summer. I think that they are energized about talking about city budgets, like police budgets. I think it's something that they care about. I think this generation is much more cognizant of things like mental health and how we need to fund that type of thing as well. But I just don't buy it. I feel like defund the police is going to be that, like 4 years ago, we were scared of saying Medicare for all. I think defund the police is going to be that kind of mainstream. It's just that we need a champion. And, you know, I give Bernie Sanders a lot of credit for that. I think that he was very good at, I mean, we've been talking about Medicare for all since Hillary Clinton in the early 90s, but he really mainstreamed it, especially with young people. And now I don't know of any Democrat who at least doesn't toy with the idea of Medicare for all or some type of public option. So I don't know. I don't buy it, to be honest.
I just want to make the point here, and you know, that Democrats benefit when there's grassroots involvement on issues. And I can't remember who. Markos, you might remember who did this tweet, but I remember seeing that for a while in the beginning of this year, there was Republican registration was going up.
Right.
As the George Floyd protests started to really catch fire across the country, and Democrats were lagging behind new voter registration, the voter registration went up with the energy that was produced by those protests nationwide. So Democrats undoubtedly benefited from that. And, you know, when I see this debate about, well, should we, is defund the police a bad thing to be talking about and whatever, I just want to remind lawmakers and people in DC, you don't tell the grassroots what they get to talk about.
Yeah,
the grassroots decide what they get to talk about. Yeah. Okay, you decide how you're going to handle that. Are you going to distance yourself from it in your race? Are you going to, no one tells people when to go protest and when to not go protest, right? People decide to do that when they feel the energy for something, when they feel committed to an issue. And the grassroots decides when they're going to go out and do something. The grassroots was energized by the inequities and this constant stream of Black men in particular, but also women and people of color being just like, slaughtered in the streets for doing nothing, for going for a jog. I mean, my God, if I couldn't like go outside, well, I can't go for a jog right now. I'm too out of shape. But the point is that like, if I could, I just can't imagine what kind of burden it is to go walk out your door and wonder if someone's going to, pull you over for jaywalking and decide that like
Kerry, wait for the focus group tested message to emerge from the DC consultancies before you hit the streets, okay?
The thing
Do it the right way.
The thing too is that the very definition of protest is to get in the way and disrupt the system. Like, you're not supposed to do a cozy protest that makes everyone feel good. It's intentional to get in the way. So it just goes against it. I'm someone who loves the Sunrise Movement. They are an entirely like young people run climate change advocacy group. And they tweeted something yesterday that said, oh, let's get this right. When is the right time to pressure elected officials? In the primary, you're going to hurt your chances of winning. In the general, first we have to win. After they win, can't we take a break? Once they're sworn in, don't risk the midterms. And it's just nonsense.
Always.
So the right time is always. Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I think are we going to pretend that Republicans won't come up with something to demonize? I mean, in 2016, it was the Honduran caravans.
Yes.
Right? Oh no, the caravan, they're coming. Yeah, there's a border and we're okay. In 2018, it was MS-13, right? The Salvador.
Right.
So Kara, your Hondurans got demonized in 2016. My Salvadorans got demonized in 2018. They will find something to scream about, to sort of tickle. And I always say Donald Trump's sort of secret power. He's legitimately excellent at tickling that racist part of the white American lizard brain. And he freaks him out. So it was defund police this time around. It would have been something else, because that's what they do.
They're always going to call us radicals. That's their entire thing. They've been calling us socialist radicals since I've been alive. So I'm just like, okay, cool, neat insult. Like, it's not going to work if we just continue. Just moving for progress is not a radical notion. And I also want to step back from people talking about how we can't say defund the police because we have to explain that it means like reallocating city budgets and this, that, and the other. I'm like, right, I literally just explained it. You reallocate. It's not that difficult. And every single piece of legislative like policy that we fight for, we always have to explain it. I have to explain Medicare for all still. So I'm sorry it doesn't make people feel good. I don't think it really made any difference. I do think that it energized a lot of young people of color to go out and vote.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line. We don't win Arizona. We don't win Georgia. We don't win Wisconsin without that vote.
Right. And let's remember that in Arizona, talk about a movement that's been in the making for a while. Is that, what was it, AB 1070 that was that happened there in 2010, where it was a whole, it was just an affront to the immigrant movement and to Latinx voters and whatever, and a lot of the organizing that everybody's like, oh, Cindy McCain. Okay, well, I
Cindy McCain.
I appreciate Cindy McCain endorsing. I appreciate her endorsing Joe Biden, but at the same time, that organizing among the immigration, among pro-immigrant groups and the immigration
Native American, yeah.
That's been going on for a solid decade now. And I think part of what we saw happen there is part of that coming to fruition too.
Yeah.
It's also like, we elected the world's most boring white. Like, I just don't understand what more Democrats could have done to calm down like voters. Like, we are a loose coalition of people who fight for progress. That's kind of what the Democratic Party is, right? And that includes a lot of people. So there's room for the defund the police people to push the Joe Biden's base of the world in the primaries to, meet somewhere. And to, I'm one of those young people who thinks that perfect is the enemy of the good. I'm happy to do incremental reform. A lot of my fellow young activists are a little bit more less patient than I am about that. But I'm not against using words that, give headlines and play to the
emotional resonance, right? People talk about how liberals are too cerebral. Like, oh, let's talk about, no, it's, you hit here, right? And they did, and it was successful. So we're running out of time. So I have one more question for you, Kara. Are young people going to stick around?
Yeah, I think so. I know people right now are organizing, like Monique said, in Georgia. All of my friends called me being like, okay, what's the next step? So I think that's very exciting. And I actually think that, to the point of Joe Biden not being a lot of young people's first pick, I think that we're excited to be like, all right, cool, we're thrilled, yay, Joe Biden. And then come January, we're gonna be like, all right, so like, what are you gonna do?
Well, yeah, I mean, to your point, the way to get young people to stick around is to reward them for having been with Democrats, having voted for Democrats, and do something like, oh, I don't know, canceling student debt to like make their lives discernibly better while helping the rest of America too, because our economy sure as heck needs a boost in the beginning of next year. So, I mean, Democrats are partially responsible, congressional Democrats, are partially responsible for keeping those, young voters who were engaged, who did the activism, who got to the polls,
right.
Keeping them involved. There are ways the Biden administration can do that if they don't spend so much time worrying about Mitch McConnell and what he thinks, and use the powers that are available to them.
And I will say, to Biden's credit, he has spent a lot of time talking about climate change, which is young people are the one group that like consistently talk about climate change, because we have to inherit this fireball of a planet. And so like, I really do give credit to Joe Biden on that too, because I know that every young person's concerned about climate change right now. So, we've got student debt reform, we got Medicare for all, we got Save Our Planet. So really just giving the next generation something that we can live with and work with is just going to be what we're going to push for. And I think we're here to stay.
Yay!
Kara, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So, Kerry, we got the sprint 2 months to Georgia. Hopefully we keep young people engaged. It's amazing to hear about all these great organizations on the ground. And maybe we have an expanded the view where we all get together and just talk like this, because Daily Kos has so many incredibly amazing, awesome, passionate people. And today was a really nice reminder of that.
Yeah, and honestly, when I started working at Daily Kos, what was it, in late 2014, I think? So I wasn't like originally around. It took me a long time to understand, because I write for the editorial part of the site. It took me a long time to understand how many, what a sort of multifaceted organization it was. And I really didn't understand that even at the beginning, at the outset, when I was hired. I wanted to write about Washington politics without being in Washington. There weren't very many places you can do that. So, anyway, like, I didn't totally get, that we have this activism department, that we have the social media department, that we have
the socialism department.
We have the socialism department, really created right now. TV. So anyway, also I do want to just throw out anyone who's stuck with us throughout this whole show. Really, you deserve. It's like a badge of honor, because we've had so many technical glitches, and my wife was in the closet in the beginning, and
my teens coming in and out.
It was a ride. It was a journey. So anyway, thank you for staying with us.
So thanks, everybody. dailykos.com. You can sign up for the email list. I think it'd be incredibly helpful if you did so, if you aren't already, and you found ways to be engaged in that Georgia Senate runoff. It is the entire ballgame. What we can accomplish next year is 100% determined by what happens in that early November or early January runoff. So let's do what we can on that front. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe to Daily Kos on YouTube. And you catch us every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. And yeah, wear your masks. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.